They were laughing when they walked in. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. Not the cold. Edmonton in February didn't need announcing. Not the crowd, thin for a Saturday afternoon. It was the laughter. Too loud. Too comfortable. The kind that meant someone knew the room belonged to them. Marcus sat in the far corner of the Whyte Avenue transit shelter, the one closest to the heating vent, his back to the wall without thinking about it. Old habit. 11 years of habit. Diesel, a 4-year-old German shepherd, with a broad chest and amber eyes that missed nothing, lay at his feet with his chin on his front paws, watching the door. Diesel always watched the door. Marcus had been in Edmonton for 3 days. Leave. 2 weeks of it, the first real stretch he'd had in 18 months. His sister lived here, out in the West End. She'd made him a bedroom out of her spare office, cleared out the boxes of Christmas decorations, bought the good coffee. He'd spent 2 days being a person instead of an operator, sleeping past 6, watching hockey he didn't care about, letting Diesel run in Heartwarming Park until the dog finally slowed down. Today he'd taken the LRT into the city, just to be somewhere without purpose. A bookstore. A cup of tea he barely tasted. A slow walk back to the transit stop. Simple things. Quiet things. The 3 of them came through the glass door in a gust of cold air and noise. The one in front, stocky, mid-20s, a red Raptors, hoodie under an open jacket despite the -20 outside. Scanned the shelter the way a person scans a room when they're used to people moving out of their way. His 2 companions followed. One taller, older, a toque pulled low. The third younger, maybe 19, staying half a step behind, like he was still auditioning for something. There were 6 other people in the shelter. A woman in her 60s with grocery bags piled around her boots. A teenager with headphones, not paying attention. A man in a Canada Post jacket eating a sandwich. 2 university students sharing a phone screen. A young father with a toddler in a snowsuit asleep in a stroller. Marcus noticed all of them in the time it took to draw a breath. Diesel lifted his head. Marcus rested 2 fingers on the dog's back. Easy. Diesel put his chin down. But his eyes didn't close. There are men who carry danger the way others carry groceries, without ceremony, without announcement, simply because it belongs to them, and they've carried it so long, they've stopped noticing the weight. Marcus Reeve was one of those men. He didn't look like what he was. Medium height, lean, in a gray wool sweater and worn boots, a paperback tucked in his jacket pocket. The kind of man you wouldn't look at twice on a Tuesday. That was by design. The one in the red hoodie, his name was Garrett, though Marcus wouldn't learn that until later, stopped in front of the older woman with the grocery bags. He said something Marcus couldn't hear. She shook her head, pulling her bags a little closer. Garrett said it again, louder. She shook her head again, and this time her hands were trembling. The tall one with the toque moved to the side, positioning himself between her and the door. Not accidental. Practiced. Marcus watched the geometry of it and understood immediately what it was. The Canada Post worker looked up, looked at the situation, and looked back down at his sandwich. So the 2 students had gone very still. The teenager with headphones had the headphones still in but wasn't moving. The young father, he couldn't have been more than 24, pulled the stroller a half-inch closer to himself. Garrett reached down and took one of the woman's grocery bags, not grabbing, just lifting it, casual, like it was his. She said something sharp, and he smiled. Marcus stood up. He didn't move fast. He didn't make a sound. He simply stood, and Diesel rose with him in the same unhurried motion, and they crossed the transit shelter in 6 steps. "Put it back," Marcus said. Garrett turned. He had the look of someone who was genuinely surprised to be addressed, which meant it didn't happen often. He looked at Marcus, the gray sweater, the worn boots, the very ordinary face, and his expression settled into something dismissive before he'd even finished looking. "Mind your business, man." "This is my business," Marcus said. He wasn't loud, he wasn't angry. His voice had the same quality as someone reading a straightforward sentence from a manual. "Put it back." Garrett's eyes dropped to Diesel and came back up. "You want to lose that dog?" Diesel didn't growl. He just looked at Garrett the way Diesel looked at everything, with complete, unblinking attention. Like he was memorizing. "No," Marcus said, "I don't." Something about the answer, the lack of fear in it, the almost bureaucratic calm, made Garrett hesitate half a second. Then the taller one moved up beside him, and whatever hesitation existed evaporated. "Walk away," the taller one said. "This doesn't have to be about you." "It already is," Marcus said. He said it simply, not as a threat, as information. The woman with the grocery bags used the moment. She gathered her things with shaking hands and moved quickly to the far end of the shelter. Marcus tracked her in his peripheral vision without taking his eyes off Garrett. Good. She was clear. The young father had already moved to the door. Through the glass, Marcus could see him outside in the cold, pulling his phone out, calling someone. Good. The teenager with the headphones finally took them out. Garrett stepped forward. Close. The kind of close designed to make someone flinch. Marcus didn't flinch. Diesel shifted his weight, one subtle rearrangement, and went still again, ready in the way that still water is ready. It doesn't tell you it's deep until you're already in it. You have no idea who you're talking to, Garrett said. Marcus considered this for a moment, genuinely. "No," he said, "but it doesn't change anything." What happened in the next 4 seconds happened fast, and did not in any way go the way Garrett had planned. Later, the transit shelter's security camera would show it clearly. Garrett reached out. Not a punch, a shove, the kind you use to set a person backward and establish physical authority. His hand didn't complete the motion. Marcus redirected it with a single small movement, the kind that requires 10,000 hours to make look effortless, and Garrett found himself bent at the waist with his arm behind his back before he understood his hand had been moved at all. The taller one came forward. "Rex," Marcus said quietly. Diesel was already moving. He didn't bite. He stepped into the taller man's path with his full weight and stopped, perfectly square, and made the sound he made in training when he was telling you in plain language that this was the last warning being offered. It was not a bark. It was something older than a bark. The tall man stopped. The younger one, the 19-year-old, had his back against the glass wall of the shelter, and he had the expression of someone who had just understood that what he'd signed up for and what this was were two entirely different things. Garrett made a sound that was trying to be a threat and not quite making it. "Here's what happens now," Marcus said. He still wasn't angry. "You sit down. You stay here. Or you leave. But you don't touch anyone else in this shelter." He released Garrett's arm. Garrett stumbled forward a step and turned around. His face was red, which Marcus noted was embarrassment more than anger. Dangerous, that combination. He looked at Marcus, then at Diesel, then at the transit shelter where everyone was watching him, and some calculation occurred behind his eyes. He straightened, pulled his hoodie down. "You're done," he said, pointing at Marcus. "You know that? You're done." Then he left. His two companions followed, the taller one giving Diesel a wide berth, the younger one not looking at anyone. The glass door swung shut. For a moment no one in the shelter said anything. Then the Canada Post worker looked at Marcus and said, "Huh." The teenager with the headphones started filming after the fact, looking disappointed they'd missed it. Marcus sat back down. Diesel lay back down. They waited for the next train. There is a particular kind of stillness that settles over something after a crisis passes. Not the false peace of a problem solved, but the genuine quiet of a moment survived. The shelter had it now. People were breathing again without noticing they'd stopped. Marcus had his eyes on the door. He already knew it wasn't over. He was right. 20 minutes later, he was 2 stops north, standing on the platform at Churchill Station waiting to transfer, when he saw the red hoodie again. Garrett hadn't left. He'd called someone. There were 5 of them now. Different faces, but Marcus could read the geometry of a group before they said a word. The way they spread out without being told to. The way the middle one, older, calm, the kind of calm that comes from authority rather than temperament, walked a step behind the others and said nothing. That one was in charge. He was perhaps 40. Short gray in his dark hair. A black jacket with no logo, the kind of person who'd learned not to announce himself years ago. His eyes found Marcus immediately, which was the first sign that he was more than what he appeared. "Nice dog," the man said. He didn't sound like Garrett. He sounded like a landlord coming to have a reasonable conversation about unpaid rent. "You mind if we talk?" "About what?" Marcus said. "About you minding your own business," the man said pleasantly. "Going forward, I see." Marcus glanced at the departure board. 3 minutes to the next train. Diesel was watching the man the way he watched the door. "I don't know what Garrett told you," the man continued, "but that corner, that transit line, that whole stretch, it operates a certain way. Has for a long time. People understand that. Smart people don't make problems." "What's your name?" Marcus asked. The man smiled slightly. Kyle, Marcus said. "I'm going to get on that train. You and these 4 are going to stay on this platform. And then we're both going to have unremarkable days." Kyle looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, but reassessment, like a calculation he'd been running had suddenly required new inputs. "You're not afraid," Kyle said. It wasn't a question. "No," Marcus said. "Why not?" Marcus thought about this with genuine honesty. "Because I've been in situations where being afraid was appropriate. This isn't one of them." Kyle was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, "Who are you?" "Nobody," Marcus said. "Somebody on leave." The train arrived. Marcus stepped on. Diesel followed, and the doors closed, and through the glass, Marcus watched Kyle on the platform, very still, talking into his phone. Some things do not end with a train door closing. This was one of them. Kyle was not a man who absorbed a situation and moved on. He was a man who managed situations, which meant what Marcus had walked away from was not concluded. It was postponed. Marcus didn't mind. He used the 40-minute ride to call his sister, check on where he'd left things, and update her without alarming her. He'd learned how to have those conversations years ago. Then he rode in silence with his hand on Diesel's back, watching the Edmonton winter pass in the train window, the wide flat streets, the river valley in the distance, the way the cold turned everything specific and clean. He was thinking about what Kyle had said, a certain way, for a long time. That didn't mean a few men running a transit shelter. That meant something established, something that had been allowed to establish itself. He wasn't on duty, he was on leave. 2 weeks of trying to be a person. Diesel looked up at him. "I know," he said. It took Kyle 11 hours to find out who Marcus was. Marcus knew this because at 4 in the morning his phone showed a missed call from a number he didn't recognize, and when he ran it against a contact in his unit, a favor for a favor, the number traced back to an address associated with a property management company that had been under low-level RCMP observation for 8 months. Not a transit operation, a revenue operation. Transit was just one tributary. Marcus sat at his sister's kitchen table in the dark, drinking coffee, and thought about that for a while. Then he made 2 calls. The first was to a person he trusted who worked in a building in Ottawa he'd rather not name. The second was to a staff sergeant he knew in the Edmonton City Police, a man named Frank who owed him a favor from a situation 3 years ago that neither of them talked about. Frank answered on the second ring. "Man, you're supposed to be on leave," Frank said. "I am on leave," Marcus said. "I'm calling as a civilian." A pause. "What did you walk into?" Marcus told him about the transit shelter. He told him about Kyle. He told him about the property management company. He told him about the RCMP file. Another pause. Longer. "The RCMP file isn't public." "I know," Marcus said. Frank was quiet for 4 seconds. "How long are you in town?" 11 more days. "Stay out of it," Frank said. "I mean that." "I know you do," Marcus said. "But I saw an elderly woman get her groceries taken in a public transit shelter at 3 in the afternoon. Frank sighed. It was the sigh of a man who understood that the conversation had already concluded the way it was going to conclude. "I'll make some calls," he said. "Don't do anything before I do." "I won't. I mean it." Marcus. I know you do, Frank. He hung up. Diesel had followed him to the kitchen and was sitting beside the table, looking at him with the patient, attending expression he used when he understood that his person was working through something. Marcus reached down and scratched behind his ears. Still a few days, Mark ahead. Let's see. It didn't take a few days. The next afternoon, Marcus was walking Diesel along the River Valley Trail. One of the trails he'd noticed was well used at midday, which made it safer, when the black SUV pulled to the curb on the road parallel to the path. Two men got out, not Garrett, not Kyle, new faces, which told Marcus that Kyle had escalated, which meant Kyle was more rattled than he'd seemed. That was useful information. Marcus stopped walking. Diesel stopped beside him. The men came down the embankment in the clumsy way of people who don't spend much time outdoors. Kyle wants to talk, the first one said. He was big, not trained, just big. In person. Tell Kyle he knows where I'll be, Marcus said. He didn't mean anywhere specific. He meant it the way you mean it when you want someone to understand that you are not adjusting your schedule. He said you'd say something like that, the second man said. He was younger, nervous. He said to tell you that your sister lives on 156th Street. The temperature dropped, not outside, inside Marcus. Something that had been relatively warm became precisely cold. He looked at the two men. He looked at them the way Diesel looked at the door. Completely. Cataloging. Tell Kyle, Marcus said, and his voice had changed quality the way water changes when it hits zero. That he made a mistake. Is that a threat? The big one said. It's a description, Marcus said. He made a mistake. That's the information. He took out his phone and called Frank before the SUV had pulled away from the curb. They mentioned my sister's address, he said when Frank picked up. A very short silence. Where are you now? River Valley, 97th Ave side. I'm making calls right now, Frank said. 2 officers in the next 20 minutes. Make it 10, Marcus said. I'm going to her house. He ran. Diesel ran beside him, stride for stride, the two of them covering the distance in a way that did not look like panic from the outside, because it wasn't panic. It was efficient movement toward a known point. There is a difference, and it matters. His sister, her name was Claire, was standing in her kitchen making lunch when Marcus came through the front door. She looked at his face and put down her knife. What happened? She said. She knew his face well enough to read it. Pack a bag, Marcus said. A few days. I'll explain in the car. She didn't argue. She knew when arguing wasn't the moment. She'd grown up in the same house as Marcus, and she'd understood something about him since they were children. That when he said a thing in that particular register, you did it first and asked questions after. Diesel went and sat by the door. They were out of the house in 11 minutes. While Claire drove to her friend's place in St. Albert, Marcus made the third call. This one not to Frank, to someone in his unit who had contacts. The kind of call that goes through 3 layers before it arrives where it needs to go. But when it does, it arrives with weight. He didn't ask for an operation. He didn't ask for anything dramatic. He asked for one thing, confirmation of what he suspected about the property management company and its connections. What came back 6 hours later confirmed it, and then some. The company was a front. Kyle managed 6 blocks of commercial property in the Whyte Ave corridor, and the transit areas around it, cash-heavy biz all of them. Restaurants and phone repair shops and convenience stores. The businesses paid a management fee. The management fee was not optional. 3 of those businesses had complained to the city over the past 2 years. 2 of those complaints had been quietly redirected. The city councilor, whose district covered the area, had received a significant private donation from a numbered company that shared a registered address with the property management firm. His name was Councilor David Arnett. 61 years old. 30 years in Edmonton municipal politics. A photograph in the council chamber where he looked like someone's dependable grandfather. Marcus sat in a Tim Hortons in St. Albert, Diesel at his feet under the table, and read through everything twice. Then he called Frank again. He didn't speculate. He didn't interpret. He read Frank what he had, slowly, and sent him the documentation and said, "You decide what this is, but now you have it." Frank was quiet for a long time. This came from a source I trust, Marcus said. "You're not a cop," Frank said. "No," Marcus said. "I'm a Navy SEAL on leave who got into a situation in a transit shelter and then they mentioned my sister's address. I'm a civilian. I'm giving you information." Another long pause. "The RCMP is going to want to know how this." "I know," Marcus said. "That's fine. Tell them. I'll talk to whoever needs talking to. You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." He could hear Frank breathing on the other end. Then, "You've been in town 4 days." "I have," Marcus said. "I need you to stay somewhere safe tonight. Somewhere I know about. My sister's friend's house in St. Albert. Send me the address." He sent it. It happened 3 days later, not in any dramatic single moment, but in the collected, bureaucratic manner that justice most reliably travels. Warrant applications, coordinated entries, a counselor called from a morning meeting to answer questions he'd been hoping would never be asked. Marcus heard about it from Frank, who called at 9 in the morning. "Arnett resigned an hour ago," Frank said, "citing health reasons." "He'll be back in front of someone," Marcus said. "Yes," Frank said. "He will. The RCMP file is open now, and it's not closing. Kyle, in custody as of 7 this morning. Garrett as well." A pause. "And Marcus, the woman from the transit shelter. The one with the grocery bags. Her name is Dorothy. She's been paying into that operation for 14 months. Through her landlord. She didn't know the money was connected. She was scared to say anything." Another pause. "She's talking now." Marcus was quiet. 14 months. A woman with grocery bags and shaking hands paying something into a machine she never saw the shape of because the shape of it was kept deliberately invisible. "Good," he said. "That she's talking." "Yeah." Frank let out, "I'll try." Marcus said. "I'll try." He and Claire ate breakfast together at her friend's kitchen table. She'd taken the week off work, more out of stubbornness than fear, and she was handling the whole thing with the same pragmatism she'd handled everything since they were kids. She was reading the news on her phone and commenting on things unrelated to any of this. At one point she looked up and said, "Do you ever have a normal leave?" Marcus thought about it. "Sometimes," he said. "I had a good morning in Harlack Park." She looked at Diesel, who was eating his breakfast with absolute focused commitment. He looked happy. "He was," Marcus said. The paperwork took most of the following week. Marcus sat across from RCMP officers in a room downtown and answered every question accurately and without elaboration, the same way he'd been trained to do in every situation where precision mattered, which was most situations. Diesel sat beside his chair and was professionally ignored by everyone in the room, which Diesel handled with dignity. On his last day in Edmonton, Marcus walked the River Valley Trail again, all the way to where it curved west, with the North Saskatchewan below and the city behind, and the sky that Edmonton kind of sky, vast, pale. The blue so high and open it felt like an argument for a different scale of things. Diesel ran. He ran in the uncontained way that dogs run when they know the ground and trust it. Back and forth, into the trees and back. Snow in his fur, ears flat with speed. Marcus watched him and felt something that took him a moment to name. It was just quietness, not the absence of things, but the presence of a particular kind of peace, the kind that occasionally follows from having been somewhere and done what the moment asked for. He hadn't been looking for trouble. He'd been looking for a bookstore and a cup of tea. Sometimes that's how it goes. The important thing, the thing that stays, the thing that makes its way into a story like this one and refuses to leave, wasn't the confrontation, wasn't the warrant, wasn't even the fall of something that had made itself very comfortable in the middle of people's ordinary days. It was Dorothy, packing her groceries in that shelter, shaking and quiet. It was the young father pulling his child's stroller an inch closer. It was the university students who went still, all the people for whom that stretch of pavement had not been safe for a long time, who had learned without deciding to that you put your head down and you endure it, because who's going to stop it anyway? Sometimes all it takes is one person who doesn't calculate whether it's worth it. Diesel came barreling back, skidded sideways through a patch of snow, looked up at Marcus with his mouth open and his amber eyes bright. Marcus crouched down, scratched behind his ears. Behind both ears, the way Diesel liked. "Good boy," he said. The narrator won't pretend there's a clean ending to what happened in Edmonton. There rarely is, with anything real. But the shelter on Whyte Avenue was a little different after that. The woman who worked the information kiosk said so herself, later, that something had shifted, that the particular kind of quiet that lives in a place where people are afraid was a little lighter. Not gone, but lighter. That's usually the most you can ask for. And if you happen to be there on a Wednesday afternoon, waiting for the southbound train, you might have seen a man in a gray sweater with a German shepherd at his feet, reading a paperback, not looking for trouble, just sitting quietly in a corner with his back to the wall. You wouldn't look twice. That's the thing about people who've learned to be strong in ways that don't announce themselves. You never do.